October 14th, 1943, 21,000 feet above Schweinfurt, Germany. First Lieutenant Robert Abb crouched over the Norden Bombsight in the plexiglass nose of his B-17 Pretty Baby, his hands trembling not from fear, but from the bone-deep cold that turned breath to frost and made every metal surface a trap for exposed skin. Through the bombsight's eyepiece, he watched the ball-bearing factories crawl into his crosshairs while German 88mm shells tore holes in the sky around him. The mathematics racing through the analog computer beneath his hands promised precision beyond anything warfare had ever known. 0.23 meters from 4,000 feet in testing. The ability to hit a 100-foot circle from this altitude. The end of indiscriminate warfare. Everything his training had promised him. Then a Messerschmitt Bf 109 flashed past at 300 miles per hour, its 20mm cannons stitching a line of holes through Pretty Baby's wing. The aircraft shuddered. Abb's calculations scattered. The bombsight that Theodore Barth had claimed could hit a 15-foot square from 30,000 feet suddenly felt like an elaborate mechanical prayer hurled into a maelstrom of lead and steel. Around him, 60 flying fortresses were already falling from the sky, taking 600 men with them, 26% of the attacking force. The bloodiest day in 8th Air Force history. And at the heart of it all sat the device that was supposed to make this impossible, the billion-dollar bombsight that would revolutionize warfare through surgical precision. The machine that would turn aerial bombardment into a scalpel rather than a hammer. The Norden Bombsight had promised to make German cities vanish through pinpoint destruction of their industrial hearts. Instead, on this October morning, it was American airmen who were vanishing, swallowed by a European sky that refused to cooperate with the mathematics of perfection. The story of how one engineer's dream of precision became a nightmare of unintended consequences begins not in the skies over Germany, but 23 years earlier, in a world still healing from one war and desperate to prevent another through the promise of technology. If you're enjoying this deep dive into the story, hit the subscribe button and let us know in the comments from where in the world you are watching from today. April 23rd, 1880. Semarang, Java. Karel Lucas van Norden was born into a world of colonial Dutch commerce, the son of a prosperous merchant whose business bridged European engineering precision with Asian markets. His father's early death in 1885 shattered this comfortable existence, sending the family back to the Netherlands, then to Dresden, Germany, where young Carl attended the Royal Art Academy. But art could not contain a mind that saw the universe as a great mechanical timepiece governed by mathematical formulas. In 1896, Norden began a 3-year apprenticeship in a Swiss machine shop, learning to translate abstract mechanical principles into physical reality through the patient discipline of precision manufacturing. Every bearing tolerance, every gear ratio, every carefully machined surface taught him that the difference between success and failure lay in thousandths of an inch. He entered the Federal Polytechnic Institute in Zurich, the same institution that had shaped Einstein's thinking, and emerged in 1904 with an engineering degree and an absolute conviction that any mechanical problem could be solved through sufficient precision and mathematical rigor. That year, Norden immigrated to the United States, where a wealthy uncle who had made his fortune in the cotton business offered him employment opportunities unavailable in Europe. He worked for a series of companies as a mechanical design engineer, but it was painfully obvious that he was difficult to employ. Prima donna, temperamental. Impossible. These were the kind words his employers used. Norden viewed himself as uncompromising in his pursuit of perfection. He saw mechanical problems where others saw acceptable tolerances. He redesigned systems others considered finished. He argued with superiors who prioritized production schedules over engineering elegance. In 1911, after 7 years of burning bridges across American industry, Norden finally found work that matched his obsessive nature. Elmer Sperry, the great American inventor whose name would become synonymous with gyroscopes, hired him to work on stabilization systems for naval gunnery. The problem was fundamental. A ship pitches and rolls. A gun turret must remain level and on target despite the ocean's movement. The solution required gyroscopes spinning at thousands of revolutions per minute, servo mechanisms responding to tiny deviations, and the kind of precision manufacturing that most American factories considered impossible. Norden thrived in this environment. His designs improved Sperry's existing stabilizers, reducing drift, increasing response time, and enhancing reliability. But Norden and Sperry proved fundamentally incompatible. Sperry wanted Norden to sign over his future gyrostabilizer patents to the Sperry Gyroscope Company. Norden refused. Sperry detested Norden's appetite for vile black cigars and 16-hour workdays. Norden resented anyone who did not share his mechanical devotion. They parted ways in 1913, though the Navy would force them to cooperate on various projects during World War I. Working independently as a consultant to the United States Navy, Norden found the perfect client. The Navy needed precision. The Navy valued technical excellence. The Navy understood that the difference between hitting a target and missing it might determine the outcome of a naval engagement, and critically, the Navy had patience. They were willing to spend years developing a system that worked correctly rather than months developing a system that merely worked. In 1920, the Navy's Bureau of Ordnance contracted with Norden to improve the Mark III bombsight, a modified British design that pilots found clumsy and inaccurate. The fundamental challenge of aerial bombing had defeated every previous attempt at precision. A bomb dropped from an aircraft follows a complex trajectory determined by the aircraft's altitude, speed, and heading, combined with wind speed and direction, air density, the bomb's ballistic characteristics, and a dozen other variables that change during every second of the weapon's 30-second fall to Earth. Existing bomb sites required the bombardier to estimate wind speed through laborious calculations, adjust for altitude and airspeed using slide rules, maintain perfect aircraft attitude through impossible cooperation with the pilot, and then release the bomb at a moment, calculated through experience and intuition. The result was accuracy measured in hundreds of yards under ideal conditions. Under combat conditions, with the aircraft maneuvering to avoid enemy fire, with clouds obscuring the target, with the bombardier's hands shaking from cold and fear, accuracy became a matter of statistical luck. Norden approached the problem with the same mechanical absolutism he brought to every engineering challenge. If the calculations were too complex for human beings to perform quickly and accurately, the solution was to build a machine that could perform them automatically. If the aircraft's motion corrupted the bombsight's aim, the solution was to stabilize the sight on gyroscopes independent of the aircraft's movement. If wind speed was difficult to measure, the solution was to measure ground speed directly and calculate wind as the difference between ground speed and airspeed. His first design, the Mark XI, appeared in 1924. In testing at the Navy's proving grounds in Virginia, it proved disappointing. The circular error probable, the radius of a circle into which 50% of bombs would fall, was 33.5 meters from only 914 meters altitude. This was an error exceeding 3.5%, actually worse than existing systems. Bombardiers universally complained that the device was far too complicated to use, but Norden had found his life's work. Over the next 7 years, he refined the design with monomaniacal focus. He worked 16-hour days at his drawing board, often travelling to his mother's house in Zurich to ponder mechanical problems in isolation, sending drawings and correspondence back to the United States Navy through diplomatic pouch from the American Embassy in Switzerland. The Navy, recognizing both Norden's brilliance and his impossible personality, gave him tremendous latitude. They even assigned him a nickname that captured his volatile nature perfectly: Old Man Dynamite. In 1923, Norden took on a partner. Theodore Barth, a former Army colonel who had managed gas mask production during World War I, brought the business acumen and diplomatic skills that Norden utterly lacked. Where Norden was formal, publicity-shy and temperamental, Barth was charming, aggressive, and politically astute. Where Norden retreated to his drawing board and spoke only in engineering specifications, Barth met with Navy officials, negotiated contracts, and understood how to navigate military bureaucracy. The partnership proved extraordinarily effective. Norden could focus entirely on engineering perfection, while Barth handled everything else. In December 1927, they formed Carl Norden, incorporated with $12,000 in a New York bank and a whopping order from the United States Navy for 2 precision bomb sights. The company's first production bomb sight emerged in 1927, hand-built by skilled craftsmen, most of them German or Italian, immigrants who understood precision manufacturing at a level American factories had not yet achieved. By 1928, accuracy had improved to 2% of altitude. From 1,200 meters, the Mark 11 could now achieve a circular error probable of only 17 meters. The improvement came through relentless attention to detail. Better gyroscopes, spinning at 7,800 revolutions per minute with less drift and faster stabilization, improved servo mechanisms linking the sight to the aircraft's controls, superior optics that eliminated distortion, refined ballistic calculations accounting for more variables. But accuracy in testing conditions meant little if the fundamental design approach remained flawed. As the Mark 11 neared production, the Navy learned that the Army Air Corps was developing an entirely different type of bomb sight in cooperation with Sperry gyroscope. This new design used what engineers called the synchronous method to measure ground speed directly, rather than calculating it from airspeed and estimated wind. The implications were revolutionary. If you could measure ground speed directly, you could eliminate the largest source of bombing error. Norden was initially unconvinced this was workable. The technical challenges seemed insurmountable. But the Navy persisted, and they offered him a development contract in June 1929. Norden retreated to his mother's house in Zurich and returned in 1930 with a working prototype that Lieutenant Frederick Entwistle, the Navy's chief of bombsight development, judged revolutionary. The new design, designated Mark 15, was delivered in production quality in the summer of 1931. The breakthrough lay in its tachometric approach. Rather than relying on the pilot's airspeed indicator, which could be wildly inaccurate, the bombsight measured how fast landmarks on the ground moved across the optical sight. This ground speed measurement, combined with a sophisticated analog computer that continuously recalculated the bomb's impact point based on changing flight conditions, promised unprecedented accuracy. In testing, the numbers were astonishing. From 1,200 meters altitude, the prototype achieved a circular error probable of only 11 meters. Even the latest production Mark 11 units could only manage 17 meters. At higher altitudes, a series of 80 bomb runs demonstrated a circular error probable of 23 meters. This was accuracy measured not in hundreds of feet, but in tens of feet. This was precision that made individual buildings viable targets from altitudes where enemy ground fire could not reach. On October 7, 1931, the Mark XV dropped a bomb that landed within 30 feet of the target from 12,000 feet altitude, in a demonstration that left Navy observers speechless. Theodore Barth immediately understood the weapon he now possessed. Not just a bombsight, but a transformation in the nature of aerial warfare. A device that could turn strategic bombing from indiscriminate destruction into surgical strikes against precisely identified targets. Barth's genius lay in understanding that the bombsight's value extended far beyond its technical specifications. He began cultivating a mystique around the device that would define its public perception for decades. He made bold claims that simultaneously captured imaginations and set impossible expectations. In 1940, Barth stated publicly that we do not regard a 15-foot square as being a very difficult target to hit from an altitude of 30,000 feet. The phrase that came to define the Norden bombsight emerged from this: aggressive marketing. Bombardiers could drop a bomb into a pickle barrel from 20,000 feet. The claim was everywhere, in newspapers, in magazines, in military briefings. At some point, Norden's company even adopted pickle barrel imagery as part of their promotional materials. In 1943, after the device had become known publicly, Theodore Barth rented Madison Square Garden and staged shows between the presentations of the Ringling Brothers and Barnum and Bailey Circus. The demonstration involved dropping a wooden bomb into a pickle barrel, at which point a pickle popped out. The audiences cheered. Congressional representatives nodded approvingly at this miracle of American engineering. News reports spread the story nationwide. Even General Henry Hap Arnold, the highest commanding officer in the United States Army Air Corps during World War II, used the analogy, saying precision bombing with the Norden was like tossing a bomb into a pickle barrel, but the pickle barrel claim was technically absurd. From 20,000 feet altitude, a 15-foot object would be completely obscured by the bombsight's crosshairs, which were made of etched metal, not the blonde human hair of legend. The optics simply could not resolve such a small target at that range. The actual testing data told a very different story. In 1940, the average score for an Air Corps bombardier was a circular error probable of 120 meters from 4,600 meters altitude. Not 4.5 meters from 9,000 meters, not 15 feet from 30,000 feet, 400 feet from 15,000 feet, under ideal conditions, with no enemy resistance. Reality was already diverging from the marketing promise, but the momentum behind precision daylight bombing had become unstoppable. The United States Army Air Corps acquired its first Norden Bombsight in 1932 and immediately recognized its superiority over existing systems. Their testing confirmed the Navy's results. The gyro stabilization worked, the sight was accurate, but it was also, in their words, entirely too complicated to use. The bombsight consisted of over 2,000 precision parts. The gyroscopic stabilization platform on the Roselati left side had to be righted before every mission through a time-consuming process of comparing the platform's attitude to spirit levels viewed through a glass window. The mechanical calculator and sighting head on the right side required the bombardier to dial in altitude, speed, direction, bomb type, and a dozen other parameters. The sighting prism could be clutched out of the computer, allowing rapid search for the target, then re-engaged for the actual bombing run. Training a competent bombardier required 18 weeks of intensive instruction. The best students achieved the rank of distinguished bombardier, with an average error in training conditions, with no fear, no smoke, no enemy fire, of 172 feet. Yet a bomb dropped that distance from many targets would cause no significant damage. The device required direct current motors, which Norden insisted upon despite their dirty brushes spreading carbon dust into sensitive bearings. The 61 ball bearings critical to the stabilization system were in such short supply that Norden had to establish his own manufacturing plant to produce them. That plant, the Barden Company, formed from Barth's and Norden's names, still exists today. In one of history's supreme ironies, Barden is now part of the German FAG ball-bearing group with headquarters in Schweinfurt, at one of the factories that Norden's bomb sights would help repeatedly attack. The technical challenges paled beside the political complications. Carl Norden regarded the army as plebeian and refused to deal with them directly. He once told an army colonel, "No man can serve the Lord and the devil at the same time, and I work for the Navy." This meant that every Norden bomb sight used by the Army Air Forces, and there would eventually be tens of thousands of them, had to be purchased through the Navy, with Navy inspectors approving every unit. The arrangement violated numerous procurement regulations and created reams of angry correspondence between senior officers of the two services. The Navy required the Army to purchase bomb sights only through them and controlled all contacts between the Army and Norden, doling units out on an allocation schedule that favoured their own needs. Why the Navy was so adamant about retaining control when they were not using the bomb sights in significant numbers remained a puzzle, but it suited Theodore Barth perfectly. He exploited the rivalry, playing both services against each other to maintain Norden's position as the sole source for precision bomb sights. An additional complication emerged from the autopilot problem. The Norden bombsight's revolutionary feature was its ability to link directly to the aircraft's autopilot, allowing the bombardier to actually fly the aircraft during the bombing run through commands from the bomb site. This freed the pilot to maintain formation and watch for enemy fighters, while the bombardier made the tiny course corrections necessary for precision. But the Army Air Corps had long worked with Sperry Corporation to equip their aircraft with autopilots. Connecting Norden's Navy-designed bombsight to Sperry's Army-designed autopilot proved nightmarishly difficult. Norden actively attempted to make the bombsight incompatible with Sperry's A-5 autopilot, continuing his decade-old grudge against his former employer. It was not until 1942 that the impasse was finally solved by farming out autopilot production to Honeywell Regulator, who combined features of Norden's SBAE system with Sperry's A5 to produce the C1 autopilot. These were mated to sight heads supplied by Norden, and the production problems that had crippled Army procurement were finally resolved. By this time, the United States had entered World War II, and the demand for bombsights had become desperate. The Army Air Forces forecast the need for 251 combat groups to fulfill their comprehensive pre-war plans. Between 1932 and 1938, Carl L. Norden, Incorporated, had produced only 121 bombsights per year, each one handcrafted by skilled machinists working to tolerances that most American factories considered impossible. The conversion from precision engineering workshop to mass production factory took years. During the first year after Pearl Harbor, Norden produced 6,900 bombsights, 3/4 of which went to the United States Navy, which had limited use for them. The bottleneck was breaking American industry. General Motors was brought in to assist with production, transforming automobile factories into bombsight plants through innovative production techniques. The same assembly line workers who had built Chevrolets now built components for the most sophisticated analog computer ever created, working 3 shifts to meet impossible demands. Security around the bombsight matched the Manhattan Project's obsessive secrecy. Bombardiers took an oath to protect the bombsight with their lives if necessary. The oath's exact wording varied, but the message was clear. If shot down, destroy the bombsight before capture. Initially, this meant firing a pistol into the device. There is no record of any bombsight being destroyed this way, but the dramatic gesture reinforced the mystique. Before each training flight, a cadet went to a bomb vault, typically a pit alongside a maintenance shop, where he signed an acceptance sheet and received a canvas bag containing the Norden Bombsight. He carried it to his assigned aircraft under the watchful eyes of armed guards. After landing, the sight was covered, removed, and returned to the vault under the same security. This level of secrecy proved largely theatrical. German intelligence had penetrated Norden's factory by 1937. Hermann Lang, a German spy working as an inspector at the plant, photographed complete plans and sent them to Germany. The Germans built a copy from these plans, tested it thoroughly, and decided it offered no advantage over their existing Lotfern 7 bombsight. They took no further action. The Japanese captured examples from downed B-25 Mitchell bombers and developed a simplified version called the Type 4 automatic bombing sight, but found it too complex to mass produce. By mid-1943, the classification had been reduced to restricted, the lowest military security level. The British had been requesting access since 1938, and by 1942 had received enough examples through various channels to understand the system completely. The secrecy that Theodore Barth so carefully cultivated served marketing purposes more than military security. It created an aura of invincibility around a device whose actual combat performance would soon prove devastatingly ordinary. The doctrine that would put the Norden bombsight to its ultimate test emerged from the strategic thinking of the 1930s. Both the United States Army Air Corps and the Royal Air Force believed that aerial bombardment would play a key role in future wars. But they reached opposite conclusions about how to conduct that bombardment. The British, after experiencing horrific losses in early daylight raids, insisted that area night bombing was the only sustainable approach. Bomb entire cities under cover of darkness, accepting that precision was impossible, but survival was probable. The Americans rejected this conclusion. They believed that precision daylight attacks against specific industrial targets would prove more effective and more humane than indiscriminate night attacks on civilian populations. The Norden Bombsight became the technological foundation for this doctrine. With the Norden, American planners argued, formations of heavy bombers could fly at 20,000 feet, above the effective range of most anti-aircraft fire, locate specific factories, and place bombs with sufficient accuracy to destroy them. The heavily armed B-17 Flying Fortresses and B-24 Liberators, bristling with 1350 caliber machine guns, would defend themselves against fighter attack through massed defensive fire. This was the theory that would send tens of thousands of young Americans into the skies over Europe. That would cost 50,000 American airmen their lives. That would force a brutal reckoning between the mathematics of precision and the chaos of combat. The collision between this promise and reality would begin over the ball-bearing factories of a small German city whose name would become synonymous with the bloodiest day in American air warfare history. The city sat in a valley in northern Bavaria, its peacetime population of 50,000, swollen by workers manning the 5 ball-bearing factories that produced much of Germany's critical supply. Ball bearings were everywhere in military equipment: aircraft engines, tank transmissions, U-boat propeller shafts, anti-aircraft gun turret mechanisms, artillery traversing systems. Without ball bearings, Germany's war machine would grind to a halt. This made Schweinfurt simultaneously one of the most critical targets in Germany and one of the most heavily defended. Allied intelligence, working from pre-war trade data and aerial reconnaissance photographs, had identified Schweinfurt's concentration of bearing production as a strategic bottleneck. Strike here, planners argued, and you could cripple German production across multiple war fronts. The factories were also relatively small and concentrated, making them theoretically ideal targets for the precision bombing the Norden Bombsight promised. What made it even more attractive was that Schweinfurt's small size would make it easy for bombardiers to locate and hit the bearing plants, a factor that also made it a poor target for British night bombing. German planners had belatedly realized the vulnerability of having so much critical production concentrated in one location, and had begun making plans to disperse the factories. But dispersion would take time and would disrupt production of the precious bearings Germany desperately needed. For now, Schweinfurt remained a single point of failure in Germany's industrial capacity. The first strike came on August 17, 1943, exactly 1 year after the 8th Air Force's first bombing mission over Europe. The mission plan was ambitious to the point of audacity. 2 separate formations would attack simultaneously. 146 B-17 seconds would strike the Messerschmitt factory at Regensburg, then continue south to land in North Africa in the first American shuttle mission. 230 B-17 seconds would attack Schweinfurt's bearing factories, then return to their bases in England. The theory was elegant. By splitting the force and having the Regensburg formation fly south to Africa, German fighters would be confused about where to intercept and would lack time to refuel and rearm between attacks. The execution was catastrophic. Weather delays separated the 2 formations by hours instead of minutes. The Germans had ample time to plot both formations, position their fighters, and attack each wave with their full strength. Over 400 Luftwaffe fighters rose to meet the American bombers. The British Spitfires escorting the bombers could only accompany them as far as Antwerp. The American P-47 Thunderbolts could barely reach the far side of Belgium. Beyond that range, the Flying Fortresses were on their own, flying deep into Germany with no fighter protection on approach or egress. The German fighters fell upon them in waves. Messerschmitt Bf-109s attacked from the front, diving through the formations with their cannons blazing. Focke-Wulf FTW-190 fighters attacked from the flanks. Some German fighters even launched air-to-air rockets into the tight bomber formations. The bombers that survived the fighter attacks flew into curtains of flak over the targets. Radar-directed German Würzburg systems tracked the formations, feeding data to predictor computers that calculated where shells would intersect with aircraft trajectories. The mechanical precision the Norden promised was met by German mechanical precision of a different kind. The mathematics of destruction worked both ways. Despite the savage opposition, most of the bombers that reached Schweinfurt successfully dropped their bombs. The Norden bombsights performed exactly as designed under the circumstances. Bombardiers who maintained steady flight, who had clear visibility, who managed to keep their aircraft level during the bombing run, achieved the accuracy promised in training. Some groups put over 50% of their bombs within 1,000 feet of the aim point. Under ideal conditions, the Norden worked. But the cost was staggering. 24 fortresses were lost from the Schweinfurt force. Another 36 were lost from the Regensburg formation. 60 bombers total, with an additional 95 damaged so severely that many would never fly again. 552 bomber crewmen were either killed or captured. The loss rate was 19%. At this rate, American aircrew would not survive their required 25 mission combat tours. The mathematics were brutal and inescapable. Post-strike reconnaissance revealed that bearing production at Schweinfurt had indeed been disrupted. One major plant's production was cut by 2/3. Overall production fell by 38%. But German industry proved resilient. Production recovered within weeks as undamaged equipment was put back into operation and workers cleared rubble. Albert Speer, Germany's Minister of Armaments, noted the disruption but also noted the rapid recovery. The Germans did not move the factories to less accessible locations, as doing so would have halted production for months. Instead, they strengthened air defenses and continued production at Schweinfurt. American planners, convinced that one more strike would finish the job, began planning a return mission. But the 8th Air Force first had to rebuild its strength. The losses from Schweinfurt-Regensburg had been devastating. New crews had to be trained. Replacement aircraft had to be ferried across the Atlantic. Bomb groups had to reconstitute their fighting strength. It would take nearly 2 months before the force was ready to return to Schweinfurt. During those months, American bomber crews flew missions to targets within range of fighter escorts or along the European coastline. The deep penetration raids into Germany were suspended while American planners grappled with an uncomfortable reality. The doctrine of self-defending bomber formations was failing. The B-17 seconds and B-24 seconds, despite their heavy armament, could not defend themselves against determined fighter attack by experienced Luftwaffe pilots. Without fighter escort deep into Germany, the loss rates would remain unsustainable, but escort fighters with the range to accompany bombers to targets deep in Germany did not yet exist. The P-47 Thunderbolt, excellent in combat, lacked the range. The P-38 Lightning was being deployed, but had not yet achieved operational readiness in sufficient numbers. The P-51 Mustang, which would eventually solve the escort problem, was still months away from deployment with the 8th Air Force. Until long-range escorts became available, American bombers would have to fly deep into Germany unescorted, accepting catastrophic losses, or limit their operations to targets within escort range. The decision was made to return to Schweinfurt. Intelligence suggested that bearing production had recovered to pre-raid levels. The target remained critical to German war production, and American strategic doctrine required proving that precision daylight bombing could succeed against heavily defended targets. To abandon the doctrine after one costly raid would be admit defeat, to concede that the British had been right about night area bombing, to invalidate years of planning and billions of dollars in investment. October 14th, 1943. Black Thursday. 291 B-17 flying fortresses launched from their bases across England. The mission briefing rooms had fallen silent when Schweinfurt was announced as the target. The crews knew what awaited them. 2 months had passed since the first raid, but the reputation of the target had only grown more fearsome. The Germans had reinforced air defences, fighter strength had increased. The Luftwaffe had studied American tactics and developed counter-tactics specifically designed to break up bomber formations. The weather forecast was concerning. Clouds over the continent, limited visibility, the kind of conditions that made precision bombing nearly impossible and fighter interception deadly. but the mission launched anyway. Too much was invested in proving the doctrine. Too many political battles had been fought to secure resources for strategic bombing. Too many promises had been made about the Norden Bombsight's revolutionary capabilities. This time, fighter escorts were provided. Groups of P-47 Thunderbolts were assigned to escort the bomber formations. But inexplicably, the fighters were not employing drop tanks that would have extended their range. Whether this was a logistical failure or a command decision remains unclear, but the result was that the escorts could only accompany the bombers for a fraction of the journey. Beyond their range, the bombers were again on their own. If you find this story engaging, please take a moment to subscribe and enable notifications. It helps us continue producing in-depth content like this. The German radar network tracked the American formations from the moment they crossed the English Channel. By the time the bombers reached Belgium, Luftwaffe fighters were already positioning for attack. The assault began over the German border and continued with savage intensity all the way to Schweinfurt and back. Wave after wave of fighters attacked from every direction, head-on attacks by Bf 109s, flank attacks by Tebel W-190 fighters, rocket attacks launched from beyond machine gun range. The German fighters had learned to focus their attacks on specific bombers, concentrating fire until the target fell, rather than spreading their fire across the entire formation. Inside the bombers, conditions were nightmarish. The temperature at 21,000 feet was 40 degrees below zero. Oxygen systems failed. Heated flight suits malfunctioned. Wounded men froze before medics could treat them. The thin aluminum skin of the aircraft offered no protection against cannon fire or shell fragments. Men watched friends die next to them. They saw other bombers in their formation explode or spiral downward, trailing fire. They knew that every moment they flew closer to Schweinfurt increased the probability they would not return. The bombardiers crouched over their Norden bombsights, trying to maintain focus on calculations and crosshairs while the world erupted in violence around them. The bombsight required steady flight. It required clear visibility of the target. It required time to synchronize the crosshairs and allow the analog computer to calculate release point. But steady flight made the aircraft perfect targets for flak. Clear visibility was impossible through the smoke and haze of battle, and time was measured in the seconds between fighter passes and shell bursts. Some bombardiers achieved excellent results. Aircraft from the 40th Bomb Group, maintaining formation discipline and steady flight despite the chaos, dropped 53% of their bombs within 1,000 feet of the aim point. Of the 1,122 high-explosive bombs dropped on Schweinfurt that day, 143 landed on the factory area, with 88 direct hits. Under the circumstances, this represented extraordinary performance by both the bombardiers and the Norden bombsights they used, but the overall picture was far less impressive. Many aircraft dropped their bombs early, either because of equipment damage, crew casualties, or simple survival instinct to reduce weight and escape the target area. Others dropped late because of course corrections or formation disruptions. Still others missed the target entirely because of smoke, cloud cover, or navigation errors in the chaos of combat. The average circular error probable for the entire mission was still measured in hundreds of meters, not the tens of meters achieved in testing. And the losses were catastrophic. 60 B-17 seconds were shot down. 12 more were damaged so severely that they crashed on return or had to be scrapped. Another 121 returned with varying degrees of battle damage. Of the 2,900 crew members who launched that morning, 650 never returned. 22% of the bomber crews were killed, wounded, or captured. The 305th Bomb Group lost 130 men, with 87% casualties. The 306th Bomb Group lost 100 men. 13 aircraft from one group returned. 13 from a group that had launched 20. The official USAAF history would later acknowledge that losses had been so great that the 8th Air Force had, for the time being, lost air superiority over Germany. Deep penetration raids into Germany without fighter escort were suspended. They would not resume for 4 months, until the P-51 Mustang, with its drop tanks and extended range, became operational in sufficient numbers to escort bombers all the way to targets and back. The doctrine of self-defending bomber formations was dead. Black Thursday had killed it. The strategic results were equally disappointing. Post-raid assessment eventually determined that German ball-bearing production fell by only 34%, recovering within weeks. Albert Speer initiated dispersal of bearing production to other locations, eliminating the bottleneck that American planners had identified. German industry proved far more resilient and adaptable than intelligence had predicted. The decisive blow that would cripple German military production never materialized. For the individual bombardiers who survived Schweinfurt, the experience shattered the comfortable certainties of their training. They had been taught that the Norden Bombsight could hit a pickle barrel from 20,000 feet. They had practiced on training ranges in perfect weather with no opposition. They had been told that precision bombing would minimize civilian casualties and strike only military targets. They had believed that American technological superiority would prove decisive. Instead, they had learned that combat introduced variables no analog computer could calculate. That fear makes hands shake. That cold makes fingers numb, that smoke and haze obscure targets. That a bomber taking evasive action cannot maintain the steady flight the Norden required. That German fighters would kill you if you flew straight and level long enough for the bombsight to work. That the mathematics of precision were meaningless when the enemy was shooting back. The bombardier's oath to protect the Norden with their life became grimly ironic. Many did die protecting their aircraft and the bombsight it carried, but not from capture. They died because the doctrine built around the Norden's supposed precision required them to fly into the teeth of German air defenses without adequate fighter protection. They died because the promise of surgical strikes against industrial targets failed to account for the reality that industry could be dispersed, that production could recover, that resilience mattered more than precision. The Norden bombsight did not fail. It performed exactly as designed, under the conditions for which it was designed. In testing, with experienced crews, perfect weather, no opposition, and unlimited time to set up the bombing run, it achieved remarkable accuracy. In combat, with exhausted crews, terrible weather, savage opposition, and seconds to make life-or-death decisions, it achieved what any bombsight could achieve, which was accuracy measured in hundreds of feet rather than dozens. The gap between promise and performance was not a failure of engineering. Carl Norden had built exactly what he promised: an analog computer that could calculate bomb trajectories with unprecedented precision. A gyro-stabilized platform that isolated the sight from aircraft motion, an autopilot linkage that allowed the bombardier to fly the aircraft during the bombing run. Every component worked as designed. The system was mechanically sound. The failure was conceptual. The belief that precision in testing conditions would translate to precision in combat. The assumption that steady flight was possible when the enemy was determined to shoot you down. The expectation that visibility would be adequate when combat took place in clouds, smoke, and industrial haze. The hope that a mechanical device, however sophisticated, could eliminate the chaos and terror of warfare. By 1944, the reality had become undeniable. The United States Army Air Forces put 31.8% of its bombs within 300 meters of the target from an average altitude of 6,400 meters. This was the combined result of improved tactics, better training, fighter escort, and yes, the Norden bombsight. It was accuracy far superior to British night bombing. It was precision that allowed targeting of specific industrial facilities rather than entire cities. But it was not bombs in pickle barrels. It was not 15-foot squares from 30,000 feet. It was not the surgical strikes that Theodore Barth had promised Congress and the American public. The average circular error probable in 1943 was 370 meters, 1,200 feet, a radius 4 times larger than a football field. Only 16% of bombs fell within 300 meters of the aiming point. A 500-pound bomb, the standard weapon for precision missions after 1943, had a lethal radius of only 18 to 27 meters. To destroy a point target with 500-pound bombs and a circular error probable of 370 meters required massive numbers of aircraft dropping massive numbers of bombs. This was closer to area bombing than precision strikes. The humanitarian promise of limiting civilian casualties vanished in the reality of hundreds of bombers dropping thousands of bombs across areas measured in square kilometers. The United States Navy, which had commissioned the Norden Bombsight and funded its development, largely abandoned high-altitude level bombing in favor of dive bombing and skip bombing. These tactics, flying low and releasing weapons at close range, achieved far greater accuracy against ships than any bombsight could deliver from altitude. The Norden found limited naval use in patrol aircraft and in specialized roles, but the Navy's primary bombing missions used tactics that made the device irrelevant. The Army Air Forces, having invested enormous resources in strategic bombing doctrine and infrastructure, had no choice but to continue. But tactics evolved rapidly. The lead bomber procedure concentrated the best bombardiers in lead aircraft, equipped with the best bomb sights. When the lead bombardier released, all other aircraft in the formation released simultaneously. This improved accuracy by ensuring that all bombs fell in approximately the same area, though it abandoned any pretense of individual precision. Formation sizes increased. If one bomber with a Norden bombsight could not reliably hit a target, perhaps 100 bombers could saturate the target area. The combat box formation, developed through painful experience, concentrated defensive firepower while allowing bombers to drop their loads together. But these were area bombing tactics, not precision strikes. The strategic effect came from tonnage and repetition, not from pinpoint accuracy. The cost in human life was staggering. The United States Army Air Forces lost over 70,000 men in the European theater alone. Bomber Command lost 55,500. These were not abstractions. They were fathers, sons, brothers. Many were teenagers, barely out of training, sent to fly missions where survival was a matter of probability rather than skill. For every bomb that hit its target, for every factory destroyed, for every legitimate military objective eliminated, the price was paid in young lives that would never return. The Norden bombsight was not responsible for these losses. Men died because war is deadly. They died because German air defenses were effective. They died because strategic bombing doctrine required them to fly repeatedly into the most heavily defended airspace on Earth. But the promise of precision, the belief that the Norden could make bombing surgical rather than indiscriminate, contributed to a doctrine that cost tens of thousands of lives while achieving results that could have been accomplished through other means. The true legacy of the Norden bombsight is not technical but conceptual. It represented the belief that technology could eliminate the chaos of war, that precision engineering could translate directly to precision in combat, that mathematical calculations could account for every variable, that the promise of accuracy in testing conditions would hold true under the stress of battle. This was a fundamentally American belief, rooted in industrial optimism and engineering confidence. The reality proved more complex. Technology matters enormously in warfare. Superior equipment provides real advantages. But technology operates within the constraints of human factors, environmental conditions, and enemy action. The most sophisticated bombsight ever created could not make clouds disappear, could not steady the hands of terrified 19-year-olds, could not force German fighters to stop attacking, could not eliminate the fundamental unpredictability of combat. Carl Norden continued his work throughout the war, designing improvements to the bombsight and developing related systems. He never attended public ceremonies or gave interviews. He remained the same difficult, demanding perfectionist who had started with Sperry decades earlier. He died in Zurich on June 14, 1965, at the age of 85. He was inducted into the United States National Aviation Hall of Fame in July 1994, nearly 30 years after his death. Theodore Barth, the charismatic promoter who had built the Norden Company and cultivated the bombsight's mystique, lived long enough to see the device's reputation evolve from miracle weapon to example of technological hubris. The pickle barrel claims that had served him so well during the war became emblematic of the gap between promise and performance. Bart retired to Cape Cod, Massachusetts, and died there, having built a fortune on a device that worked exactly as designed but could not fulfill the impossible expectations he had created. The Norden Bombsight saw continued service after World War II. During the Korean War, it equipped American heavy bombers attacking targets in North Korea. During the Vietnam War, retired World War II technicians had to be called back to service to maintain bomb sites on aging B-29 aircraft. The last combat use occurred in 1967, when the Naval Air Observation Squadron 67 used Norden-equipped aircraft to drop sensors onto the Ho Chi Minh Trail. By then, the age of precision-guided munitions had begun. Laser-guided bombs, which actually could hit specific buildings, replaced the need for mechanical bomb sights and human bombardiers. GPS-guided weapons made accuracy a matter of satellite coordinates rather than analog calculations. Modern strike aircraft drop fewer bombs with far greater accuracy than entire formations of World War II bombers could achieve. The promise that the Norden represented but could not fulfill has been realized through technologies Carl Norden never imagined. Today, surviving Norden bomb sites occupy places of honor in museums. The National Air and Space Museum displays the Norden from the Enola Gay, the B-29 that dropped the atomic bomb on Hiroshima. The Computer History Museum features one as an example of early analog computing. Collectors and aviation enthusiasts preserve examples in varying conditions, recognizing the device's historical significance even as its technical capabilities are eclipsed by modern systems. The story of the Norden Bombsight offers lessons that extend far beyond World War II aviation. It demonstrates the danger of conflating testing performance with combat performance. It reveals how marketing promises can create expectations that no technology can meet. It shows how doctrine can become imprisoned by the capabilities and limitations of specific equipment. It illustrates the gap between engineering precision and battlefield chaos. Most importantly, it reminds us that technology, however sophisticated, operates within human and environmental constraints that cannot be calculated away. The Norden Bombsight was a masterpiece of mechanical engineering, representing the pinnacle of analog computing and precision manufacturing. But no amount of engineering genius could change the fundamental reality that bombs drop through weather, that aircraft fly through enemy fire, that human beings make mistakes under stress, and that war introduces variables no mechanical device can fully account for. The bombardiers who flew over Schweinfurt on Black Thursday performed with extraordinary courage. They held their aircraft steady despite the flak. They maintained formation despite the fighters. They completed their bombing runs despite losses that would have broken less determined men. Many achieved remarkable accuracy under impossible conditions. They were let down not by the technology they used, but by a doctrine that promised more than any technology could deliver. The Norden Bombsight did not make German cities vanish in daylight. It did not deliver the surgical precision its creators promised. It did not transform warfare through mathematical certainty. But it represented something quintessentially American, the belief that any problem, however complex, could be solved through sufficient engineering, enough precision, and adequate resources. That belief built the B-17 Flying Fortress and the P-51 Mustang. It built the infrastructure that put millions of men under arms and equipped them better than any military in history. It built the atomic bomb and the computer and the systems that eventually made precision warfare a reality rather than a promise. The Norden Bombsight failed to achieve its promised precision, but the optimism and confidence it represented would ultimately succeed through technologies its creators never imagined. Thank you for watching. For more detailed historical breakdowns, check out the other videos on your screen now and don't forget to subscribe.